I met Ray last night for the first time, and I shook his hand, and I looked in his eyes. And I'm going to tell you, his mission comes from here. And that's all I'm going to say about Ray, because his message is genuine. And it's important. And that's why you're all here. And Ray gave me this book, and it gave me chills. Thank you. And Ray. Oh, this is being recorded.
Thank you, Terry. I speak from my heart because I can't depend on my head anymore. And usually if you speak from your heart, you're never going to go wrong. And being here today, truthfully, it's a dream come true, because I've had the utmost respect and admiration for Dr. Cantu, all he's accomplished, and the confidence that he's going to accomplish even more. And I've been at this concussion awareness for over 20 years. And I was cast off at first, and nobody paid any attention. There wasn't much evidence to go on. And then Dr. Cantu came along, and things changed. And thank God for that. Thank you, Dr. Cantu. Every successful boxer knows the importance of having knowledgeable and dedicated staff work their corner. The great Muhammad Ali was guided by legendary trainers Angelo Dundee and Bundini Brown. And I'll tell you, athletes are so fortunate they have Dr. Cantu and his dedicated staff working their corner and making strides, great strides, on behalf of their safety and well-being. And I've met some inspiring people along my journey, and I'm forever grateful to Dr. Cantu for his continued research. And also to Andy Siegel, a New York City personal injury lawyer, who, because of his passion and commitment to survivors of traumatic brain injury, authored my book, Second Impact, the Ray Ciancaglini story, to send a message to young athletes about the harm that can result by playing through a concussion. And today, through my story, I will explain the devastating effects of second impact syndrome and the motivation behind the decisions of athletes who try to circumvent rules and regulations. I'm a former professional boxer, a member of the Rochester Boxing Hall of Fame, and in a career that spanned close to a decade, I've never been knocked down. Every fight was a war, and I always prided myself with facing top-ranked fighters, which included several U.S. and Canadian national champions. I'll tell you, the only regret I have as a boxer is that I didn't defeat my toughest opponent. And that opponent was a concussion. And concussion is an invisible injury. There are no crutches, no swelling, no stitches, or any other visible signs of injury. I fought this invisible opponent throughout my career, not knowing what it was, or that I was in jeopardy of developing the long-term complications that I cope with today. For many years, I've been battling Parkinson's syndrome and dementia pugilistica, which is a variant of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Now, this is the same condition that has affected many retired NFL players. Well, these progressive disorders are the direct result of not addressing concussions appropriately during my boxing career. I take full responsibility and blame no one for my condition. My objective is to educate athletes about the importance of immediately reporting and properly addressing concussion symptoms and serve as a deterrent for any athlete who might consider circumventing proper concussion protocol. I endorse and encourage athletes to play all sports. The attributes and work ethic principles developed through athletics will benefit athletes well beyond their playing days. Well, the demanding sport of boxing, it taught me many lessons about character, humility, and work ethic. I experienced the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. I learned the true meaning of heart, courage, and focus, and what it takes to be successful. Heart is measured by your inner desire to keep punching against all odds. And courage is the ability to fight back your fear. And focus is the difference between a contender and a champion. You may possess great potential, but you'll never be a champion until you achieve the champion. You'll never achieve champion status, actually, until you master the discipline of focus. Now, as far as success is concerned, one night I sat in a dressing room exhausted after a hard-fought victory, which they had me an underdog in. But I always believed in training extremely hard and maybe catching that guy a notch ahead of me, maybe catching him slacking a little in his training, and I did. A sports reporter, I sat in the dressing room exhausted, and one of the sports reporters came in first, and he put a microphone in front of my face, and he made a facetious remark. He said, "Hey, Ray, you got a little lucky tonight." Well, I paused for a second, and then I replied back, "Yeah, you know, you're right. It seems the harder I train, the luckier I get, buddy." Well, it's my response drew a little laughter from the other sports reporters, but in reality, I realized early on in my career that luck has very little to do with success. Success is all about dedication and hard work, and dedication is what separates the best from the rest. And the decisions you make will also determine how you are defined. Getting to the top will define you as a contender, but staying at the top will define you as a champion. Resiliency and determination define both my success as a boxer, and it also defined my demise. Well, maybe I'll repeat that. Resiliency and determination define both my success and demise as a boxer, and it is those same attributes that define and drive me today. Now, concussion is an inherent risk of sports competition, and athletes accept that risk. Concussions are hard to prevent. You play clean, you play hard, but they're going to happen. But what is preventable is when an athlete who has sustained a concussion sustains a second concussion before the symptoms from the first injury have properly healed. This is called second impact syndrome, which carries with it a very high risk of permanent brain damage, and in exceptional cases can be fatal, primarily among adolescents. In my opinion, the concussion that exhibits mild symptoms can potentially be the most dangerous and deceptive. When the symptoms are mild, you're more apt to think it's not that serious, not report it, and play through it. Well, this puts you at risk for second impact syndrome. Early detection and being totally symptom-free before returning to competition significantly reduces any risk of second impact syndrome. Now, numerous concussions increase the risk of developing neurological complications later in life. After your first concussion, you're more vulnerable to receive a second, and it's easier to get a third, and so on. And the lifetime number must be monitored with extreme caution should be used when several concussions occur within a short period of time. Now, the number of concussions an athlete can sustain before being advised to retire from contact sports, well, it's a very controversial subject. Present studies remain kind of inconclusive, and further research is ongoing for a more definitive answer. But I find most doctors that I talk to handle each case on an individual basis with the consideration given to the athlete's concussion history. Well, the symptoms of concussion are the body's red flags. They're warning you that something's wrong. They can be immediate or delayed by hours or even days after the injury. The most common symptoms are amnesia, headache, nausea, concentration problems, sleep disturbances, and changes in personality and behavior. It's so important to immediately report all symptoms of concussion, no matter how minor they may appear. And again, to ensure a safe return to play after a concussion, it's imperative that athletes strictly adhere to their school concussion protocol and doctor's instructions. You know, my condition could have been avoided if I had known the consequences of ignoring a concussion symptoms. And the problem that athletes are hiding concussions at all levels is real. And downplaying the problem only increases the chance that an athlete will decide to roll the dice where the wager far outseeds the prize. Now, my desire to become a boxer began way back in 1957. I'm that old. I was 6 years old, hanging out at my grandparents' Italian restaurants in a little town in the Finger Lakes, Geneva, New York. I didn't have much home supervision because the restaurant business was so time demanding on my family. But it was a Friday night, and the barroom was packed with patrons to watch the Gillette Friday night fights on the large black and white television above the bar. And middleweight champion Carmen Basilio, who resided probably 50 miles away from there in Canastota, New York, he was the big favorite all the time, even nationally. And he was fighting, and I watched that fight as the crowd in the barroom, you know, they roared with every punch Carmen threw. And that night made such an impression on me. After the fight, I ran in the back room, and I got this old bag and filled it with linens, hung it from a pipe, and I started punching on the bag, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw my grandmother standing there with her hands on her hips. And she said, Raymond, what are you doing? And I told her, well, Grandma, I'm Carmen Basilio. And she said, no, there's only one Carmen Basilio. Never mind that boxing, you better go to college. Now, get back in the bar room and help your grandfather. I got a little swat on the behind, and off I went, and the rest is history. I started competing in organized boxing at the very young age of 14. And by the age of 16, a junior in high school, I had everything going for me. I was a well-behaved, high-honor student, and as a boxer, they were projecting me with such a bright future in the ring. One night during a bout at Memorial Auditorium in Buffalo, New York, I caught a right hook to the back of my head. There was no knockdown, but I was temporarily dazed. My vision became blurred, and my hearing was impaired. The crowd noise fluctuated from loud to soft to loud and back and forth. And, I never experienced this feeling before. I fought through it, and I won a unanimous decision, but the next day, I developed a headache, and I felt real tired, fatigued. And these symptoms were of a moderate degree, so I passed it off as just being physically run down from that tough bout the night before. And I was scheduled to fight again 1 week later at the Syracuse War Memorial. Well, I didn't want to miss that opportunity, so I resumed training, even though I was hampered by persistent headaches and fatigue. I should have gotten medical attention, but I just didn't think it was that serious. Little did I know, this was the beginning of all my troubles. When I entered the ring in Syracuse, I knew something was wrong. During the first round, I felt lethargic, mechanical. I wasn't as sharp as usual. And sure enough, I got my bell rung for the second time in 1 week. There was no knockdown, but I was dazed. In between rounds, when I returned to my corner for instruction, I felt nauseated, and they handed me the water bucket to vomit in. I was in a real fog, so I relied on my boxing instinct to go the distance, but I lost a close decision. The fog lingered and affected me to the point where I struggled during the post-fight interview, and at times, I didn't even realize I had lost. Now, my life changed after that night. From a well-behaved honor student, I started missing school, sleeping in class, and failing every course, including gym. The headaches and fatigue persisted. I had trouble concentrating, and I was sleeping sometimes 14 hours a day. And the big one is I started having behavioral problems and developed a resentment toward authority figures. And I couldn't explain why. No one had any idea what was causing my sudden change in grades and behavior. Well, I now know I was suffering from second impact syndrome, a condition back then not yet recognized in medical practice. Well, this is how I was fooled into making some really bad decisions. At that time, there was little known about concussions or the dangers of not addressing them properly. The symptoms of the first concussion were mild, which fooled me into thinking it wasn't that serious. And I thought the symptoms were only temporary, and I didn't want to miss that next opportunity. Well, adding to the confusion was the false belief that you had to get knocked unconscious to get a concussion. And I had never been knocked out or even knocked down. And then before that, I received the Golden Glove Heart Award, given to the boxers showing the most outstanding determination and resiliency. And that award's given to one boxer for the whole year. But that award gave me the false impression that I was invincible. And then during a training session at the gym, I asked a couple of the old-time veterans for advice. I said, I've been having these headaches and I feel tired. And right then, one of the old-timers jumped up and quipped, "Son, headaches are a part of this game. You have to deal with them. You have all the ability to get to the top. You have to be able to dish it out and take it to in this sport. Now gut it up, or this game's not for you." Well, those comments hit me hard. More than anything else, I wanted to be middleweight champion. But don't get me wrong, the old timers were not intentionally giving me bad advice. They just didn't know any better at that time. And the headaches did seem to lose intensity between fights, which led me to believe that headaches were part of the game and would clear up when I retired. And I worked so hard to get to that level. I didn't want to lose my rank, and I thought boxing was my whole life. So I was determined, I'm going to gut it out. Well, instead of seeking professional help for my symptoms, I foolishly resorted to self-remedies. I was looking for a little help to mask the symptoms, so for chronic fatigue, I took excessive amounts of vitamin B complex and caffeine tablets for more energy. I took high doses of aspirin to take the edge off the headaches, especially on fight night after the pre-examination by the doctor. But the high doses of aspirin then upset my stomach. So now I found myself guzzling Pepto-Bismol to remedy the stomach aches. What a real tangled web I was making there. And during a bout at Memorial Law in Buffalo, midway through the 4th round, I got a cut above my right eye, small cut. But the high doses of aspirin that I was taking came back to haunt me. It thinned my blood and made that small cut bleed way more than normal. And I had the best cut man in the business work in my corner that night, but he just couldn't stop the wound from bleeding, which prompted the referee to stop the fight. Before the beginning of the 5th round, I was way ahead on points. I beat myself that night. But I continued to self-medicate, still believing that those headaches were part of the game. Well, some athletes have to be protected from themselves. My relentless determination and desire defied common sense and logic. In 1971, the New York State Boxing Commission withheld my license to box in the state of New York because of abnormal results from a mandatory annual electroencephalogram brainwave test. The reapplication process required a repeat electroencephalogram and a review hearing before the New York State Boxing Commission's Medical Advisory Board, but in between that was a year layoff. Well, after confiding again with the veteran boxers, I learned that this could be a long process and procedure, and no guarantees, as New York was considered the top when it came to rules and regulations and was notorious for having, again, the toughest rules in the country. Unlike the National Football League and Major League Baseball, professional boxing was not governed by one national commission. And boxing was independently supervised by each state, lacking comprehensive regulations and the technology to access and enforce out-of-state suspensions. Well, I listened to the veterans, and I therefore left New York using different alias names to fight in states that had less regulation and some no regulation at all. In 1973, I returned to New York for a repeat electroencephalogram that again produced abnormal results, nullifying my application for a New York State boxing license. I defiantly circumvented a New York policy that was put into place to protect me. And looking back now, a federal law or a National Boxing Commission would have protected me from myself. I continued to fight in unregulated states, but the persistent headaches and fog were wearing me down, both mentally and physically. In 1974, I took a break from boxing, expecting that these symptoms would go away with rest, but the symptoms didn't go away, and I then realized I wasn't going to be the middleweight champion. I reluctantly hung up the gloves, and I threw out all of my memorabilia. Everything that I worked so hard for, I just threw it all out. And shortly thereafter, because of sedentary and cognitive issues, I took the advice from a very good physician friend and voluntarily admitted myself for evaluation at the Clifton Springs Mental Health Clinic. I remained 10 days at the clinic before leaving against medical advice, where I was diagnosed with severe depression. And I was living in denial and didn't want to accept that answer. I refused to take prescribed medication or get counseling, suggested counseling. I went into seclusion again, and I traveled the country, and I hiked all the national parks where I kind of took refuge, where nobody was around. But after several months, the expression, "you can run, but you can't hide," became a reality. And I came out battling because that's what I do. My attitude has always been never give up. I relied on my relentless attitude to get me through the toughest of rounds. Well, now I was relying on that same attitude to answer the bell for the toughest fight of my life. An attitude is a matter of choice. And Charles Swindoll said it best. Life is 10% what happens to us, and 90% how we deal with it. Well, I began pursuing another aspiration. I enrolled in college to become a physical education teacher, but I failed my first semester because of concentration problems. I just couldn't retain what they were trying to teach me. Then I landed a job at Eastman Kodak with a little help from a fight promoter that had some pull up there. And I seemed to be holding my own, but several years later I developed hand tremors and the forgetfulness worsened. And Kodak sent me to Strong, the University of Rochester Medical Hospital, where a team of neurologists diagnosed me with dementia, pugilistica, and Parkinson's syndrome. And they said it was the direct result of untreated concussions. I repeat, untreated concussions. I was then forced to retire at the very young age of 44. You know, the only gain that I could make from this lifetime of pain was to do everything I could to prevent another unknowing athlete from going down the same path of destruction. I then devoted my life to concussion education and research. You know, I knew all too well the mindset of determined athletes, and the key was concussion education. I contacted the NFL and the NCAA expressing my concerns about athletes receiving mandatory concussion education, only to be told, we have everything under control. Okay. I promptly established the Second Impact Concussion Education nonprofit organization, and the organization consisted of concussion information website and free speaking engagements at high schools and colleges. And I'll tell you, that continues to resonate on a national platform with thousands of athletes from youth to the professional level. And I'm so grateful that my input was instrumental in getting passed into New York state law with the help of Senator Hannan and DeZolio, the Concussion Management Awareness Act. And this law requires that all school personnel and coaches complete a state-approved concussions course biannually and prohibits any athlete that has suffered a concussion from participating in athletic activities. until they are symptom-free for 24 hours and authorized to return by a licensed physician. Also of note, my input was a contributing factor that enabled Congress to pass into law the 1996 Professional Boxing Safety Act. And this law put an end to the dangerous, underhanded practice of state hopping. This law prohibits boxers from fighting anywhere in the United States while under suspension. And I'm also so grateful that CTE and sports concussion research have made great strides in the last decade. And, you know, as I spoke earlier, that's Dr. Cantu's been a huge part of that. And upon my death, my brain will be donated for chronic traumatic encephalopathy research with Dr. Cantu in Boston University. You know, the most important factor that I want athletes to take away from my presentations is honesty. Some athletes post hiding a concussion as a badge of honor or courage. Well, I'm still paying the price for gutting out a concussion. And I can tell you, it was neither an honorable or courageous act. It was a self-destructive act. And when it comes to preventing the long-term ill effects of head trauma, athletes must learn to advocate for themselves. Immediate honesty about any concussion symptoms will always be the best policy and protection. It is imperative for athletes to be total honest about symptoms during rehab or with the initial, when it happens, because the initial evaluation is so important. And I caution, you know, that when they are in rehab, to be honest about those symptoms there too, so they don't have a relapse. Honesty, it's so important. And I also caution athletes to be very honest on the preseason baseline concussion test. And take that test seriously, because those honest answers are going to be what helps them get back to play safely. And I find a lot of players are laying back on that test, so if they get a concussion, you know, that'll be easier for them to pass. So I hope that's made a dent in that procedure. And I also highly recommend the services of a certified athletic trainer at every high-impact sporting event. They're an essential asset to sports program, where in the case of concussion, prompt evaluation and proper supervision is so crucial. And one other, the last one here that really gnaws at me. Another this area is, or I'm seeing products coming out that claim to prevent concussions, cure existing concussions, or shorten recovery time. Athletes should never, under any circumstances, take any product without the consent of their doctor or athletic trainer. And athletes must also be honest about symptoms that may be affecting them academically. Many school systems are implementing the return to play after a return to the classroom after a concussion program as part of their concussion management protocol. And the purpose of this program is to aid a concussed student who may need a gradual transition back to academics. And you know how important that would have been for me. Well, I've had 40 years or better to ponder what went wrong. And I always come back to the same conclusion. Lack of concussion education and peer pressure led to my demise. Concussion, again, is an invisible injury which can cause a concussed athlete to be vulnerable for negative remarks and peer pressure. This pressure can push an athlete into returning to competition before they've properly healed. In my case, the persistent concussion symptoms were affecting my reflexes and my equilibrium, and the headaches would intensify with exertion. The harder I went, the worse the headache got. So to compensate, I was actually holding back on my opponents. I was doing just enough to win, and I was winning, but not winning in convincing fashion like before. But as a result of my change in aggressiveness, I had to counterpunch hurtful remarks, as some question if I had lost the eye of the tiger. And some even had the audacity to question if my heart was still in the game. The same boxer that had won the Golden Glove Heart Award was now having his heart questioned. Those negative remarks fueled my bad decision to gut it out. Never underestimate the powerful influence of peer pressure. Well, you know, I'm very grateful for so many things, and two of my quotes, I've seen it in other papers and across the country, and the first is, leave no doubt, wait it out. If you have even the slightest doubt that something's wrong, wait it out, have it checked out. And the game you sit out today could be the career you save tomorrow. You know, I threw a whole career away for the sake of not missing one fight. What a foolish mistake. I challenged a concussion, and I got beat. It cost me my quality of life and my future potential. Athletes should never take for granted the privilege of playing the sport they love. They should be dedicated, take care of their body, and make wise decisions that'll enable them to reach their full potential. Now, after all of this, for any athlete that still thinks they may want to risk their future by participating with an existing concussion, this is what it's like for me living with a permanent brain injury. My life now consists of not what I want to do, but what I'm capable of doing. I'm very restricted. I've had a headache every day since I was 16. I'm now 68. For many years, I slept excessively, and now I struggle. If I get 3 hours of sleep a night, it's a blessing. And the tremors. You know, I used to be so ashamed of my hands trembling when we went out in public. I would sit on my hands to hide them from shaking. I don't do that anymore. It's what it is. And the dementia. I'm constantly in a fog, every day, 24/7, and I battle it. I have good days and bad days. On good days like today, I can function fairly well for short periods of time. Medication adjustments with the consent of my doctors enabled me to be more audible during this period. But on bad days, I struggle to tie my shoes, and I sometimes forget the names of some lifelong friends. And on bad days, I'm restricted to the house, where I not only miss family and friends' functions, but so does my wife, Patty, or she must attend alone. And my family sacrifices so much on my behalf, and I struggle with that guilt. And I'm so fortunate to have a woman like my wife that has been with me for 38 years, and without her, you can fill in the rest. One of the hardest conditions for me to accept was having my driving and hiking privileges restricted for my own well-being and the well-being of others. what really hit me the hardest was being restricted from taking my granddaughters for walks unsupervised because of memory lapses. And this is the grim reality of more restrictions to come. Well, with that being said, I've never been knocked down in my entire career, and I refuse to allow dementia to be the first one to do it. Now, if I had it all to do over again, I would still pursue a boxing career, absolutely. I would still compete with the same tenacity and dedication that it takes to be a champion. The only thing that I would do differently is that I would immediately get medical attention for any symptoms of injury that my body was warning me to address. With the education that we have today about concussions, the word is out and the help is there. Athletes need to make the smart choice. In closing, always remember, I wouldn't be standing here talking to you today if I had addressed that first concussion properly. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Wonderful. Can you come to the questions?
Oh, absolutely.
All right, super. Ray will be back for the question session at the end of the morning. I read every page of his book, and I recommend it to everybody. To me, it was two love stories. One was the love of boxing, and that was Ray. And the other was Patty, his wife, and her love for him. And without it, he wouldn't be here today either. And I thought that that talk was as good as I've heard from any professor, and is the best therapy in the world for what Ray's enduring. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you so much.